Welcome to Atanasda, Chapter 9 Alpha, in which we learn the present active participle. So just a quick review on what is a participle. As we learned in Chapter 8 Alpha, a participle is a verbal adjective. As an adjective, it must agree with the noun it modifies in gender, number, and case. As a verbal adjective, it shows tense and voice. So when I ask you to parse a participle, I want you to give me the gender, number, case, tense, voice, and then say the word participle. So 6 things. So in Chapter 8 Alpha, we learned present middle participles. Now in Chapter 9 Alpha, we're learning present active participles. Just a review on what participle means. Most of the active participles in Greek will be translated into an active participle in English, blanking. So for example, running, eating, and dancing are all present active participles in English. When we learned the middle participle, even though they were middle in voice in the Greek language, we almost exclusively translated them actively in the English language so some of them were deponent, so like bilomenos in Greek is middle in form but active in English meaning, so we translated as wishing. Some of those middle participles had a reflexive sense, like luomenos with omicron upsilon in the stem. And that could be translated with the reflexive sense of washing oneself or bathing. Both of those are active participles in English. Or sometimes they were causative participles, like luomene. This time I've used a feminine participle. The stem here has just the upsilon, so it's a different word. This one's causing somebody else to be released, which we translate as ransoming. So with that quick review on meaning, let's go to forms. So present active participle forms. We're going to start with the form of to be. In first person singular present active indicative, it's a me. And the participle stem is ont or us. It's a 3-1-3 adjective, which means the masculine and neuter follow the third declension, and the feminine follows the first declension. The other adjective we learned that follows this pattern is pas, upon, another 3-1-3. So let's write out our on, usa, on, and then this translates to being, whether it's masculine, feminine, or neuter. Remember that the neuter accusative is always identical to the nominative. And then let's write out our true stem ont for the masculine neuter. And then add our third declension endings. The only form here that needs to change is the dative plural ontsi becomes oosi. Then if we look at the feminine, we write out our feminine stem us, put it everywhere, add our endings, then apply some accent rules. So if the ultima is long, then that circumflex on the penult changes to an acute. So that applies in these 4 cases that I've underlined. Otherwise, the feminine plural genitive is just an oddball, and it gets a circumflex on the ultima. And then the remaining cases have a short ultima, and so you keep the circumflex on the penult that you saw in the nominative singular feminine. So now that we understand the present active participle of to be, we can use it to build the present active participle of the other forms. So we'll look at one each of thematic verbs, epsilon-contracts, and alpha-contracts. So just like the form of to be, the way that we form participles of other verbs is you take the verb stem plus the participle of to be. So in our sample thematic verb, luo, the stem is lu, and then we add on, usa, on. So let me write out the stem everywhere, and then add our forms of the present active participle of to be, and then we apply some accent rules. So don't forget the feminine genitive plural is special. We put a circumflex on the ultima, and then otherwise our regular accent rules apply. If the ultima is long, we put an acute on the penult. So that applies in these cases. And if the ultima is short, we put an acute on the antepenult. So that applies in the green cases. And then just remember that for the purposes of nouns and adjectives, that final alpha iota on the feminine nominative plural is considered short. Other times, alpha iota would be long, but in feminine plural nominative, it's short. And then the last thing I have to say is that our rule should say the short ultima means an acute on the antepenult, but if you don't have an antepenult because it's only 2 syllables, then we're going to put a circumflex on the penult. So that is why the neuter singular is lu on. So the slides are going to get easier and easier as we go. So let's move on to the epsilon contract. So our sample verb is φιλέω, the stem is φιλέ, and we're going to add on usa on. I deliberately did not put any accents on this because we'll apply them when we make the full participle. The contractions that you need to know are epsilon plus omega results in an omega, epsilon plus omicron results in omicron upsilon, and epsilon plus omicron upsilon results in omicron upsilon. Now, what the final accent is depends on what you begin with. So if you begin with an acute on the first of these 2 syllables, then the contraction has a circumflex. So et-o becomes o, et-o becomes oo, and et-oo becomes oo. Then on the flip side of that, if your acute is on the second syllable of the 2 in the contraction, then the resulting syllable gets an acute. So et-o becomes oo, and et-oo becomes oo. So with that knowledge, let's build our present active participle of φιλέω. So there's our stem, there's our endings, apply some accent rules. I do not know why this one with a short ultima has an acute on the penult, and I don't have my big grammar book with me, so I can't look it up. But the rest of them, you follow the normal accent rules. And then keep in mind that if it had an acute on the first of the 2, it's going to result in a circumflex. If it had an acute on the second of the 2, it'll result in an acute. So there you go. And then let's take that knowledge and do an alpha contract. So timάω is our sample, stem is tima, our endings on usa on. Contractions that you need to know are a-o becomes o, a-o becomes o, and a-u becomes o. So everything becomes omega. Hooray! Same as before, if it started with an acute on the first syllable of the 2, then you'll get a circumflex on the contraction. And if it started with an acute on the second syllable of the 2, then the contraction will get an acute. So let's make some stems, add some endings. In this slide, I color-coded everything. So, again, I can't explain why it's tιμάων instead of temaón, but other than that, everything we know about accent rules applies. The purple ones are when we had an acute on the first syllable of the 2 and the contraction gets a circumflex over the omega. The green ones are when we had an acute over the second syllable of the 2, and so the resulting contraction gets an acute. And then, of course, our oddball, the feminine genitive plural, gets a circumflex on the ultima. Just one thing to note, in the book, there is an accent air. They have tιμάω-san, where it should be, as I have here, tιμάω-san, resulting in tιμάω-san. And that is it for now. See you next time.